All right, so we're kicking things off here. I'm filling in for Mike this month. He's currently on vacation. I can't believe that he actually put me up to this because normally I'm sitting in the background kind of running the tech stuff. So I'm doing a little double duty on this. But thanks everybody for coming to this month's Colorado Pilots or the Colorado Pilots Association CPA Presents event. This month we have Chuck Stout. He's the Wings Over the Rockies museum curator, and he's been involved with both aerospace and museum work his entire adult life. Chuck learned to fly as a teenager and has been an active pilot ever since. But ironically, he's never flown for a living. However, he has helped design, build, and test satellites. Helped to write and illustrate dozens of books and online courses to train pilots. Created scores of museum exhibits and given hundreds of presentations on science and aerospace topics. After volunteering for decades, Chuck now works full-time for Wings Over the Rockies. He's very passionate about encouraging Americans to improve their critical thinking skills and especially likes sharing his interest in the aerospace history. Whether in elementary school classrooms or senior center, his lively presentations encourage interaction and keep audiences engaged, interested, and entertained. Tonight's session should be a really good one here on the pesky little airplanes. So without further ado, we'll turn everything over here to Chuck, and you have the con.
Thanks very much, Brian. A couple of things that we left out in the intro is that I'm the former curator of Wings Over the Rockies. I retired in May. I'm still working for them, but just not full time. And I should also mention that I'm a longtime CPA member and love the organization. I love connecting with you at air shows, fly-ins, stuff like that. I was part of the board for about 5 years, and this is a great organization, as you probably all well know. Without further ado, we got a lot of ground to cover, so I'm going to start sharing my screen, and we're going to talk about those dang little airplanes. Are they a menace or a necessity? Can everyone see my screen?
We can see it. You should be good to go.
Okay, if one can see, they can all see.
Yep.
First, we'll start with the very, very, very basics, because I know that all of you are experienced aviators, but sometimes you might get asked, okay, what is this general aviation that people are talking about? And the short legalistic answer is it is all aviation that is not the military or the scheduled commercial airlines, the big Part 121 airlines. Well, okay, that's what it's not. But what is general aviation? Well, it's more than 630,000 pilots in the United States. Heard you talking earlier about all the people going to Oshkosh. This is one of the deals out there behind the red barn, people getting ready to watch a movie. This is just one event. That's not 630,000 people, although they do get about 250,000 at most Oshkosh fly-ins. It's more than 200,000 airplanes in the United States. And that is about 95% of the entire United States civilian aircraft fleet. General aviation is 90% of the flying aircraft in the United States. The scheduled airlines are 5%, and the military is 5%. This shocks a lot of non-aviation people. But if any of you have ever flown into Centennial, you know that about half of them are in the pattern with you right there, right? It's 27 million flight hours annually and 35 million takeoffs and landings. And who doesn't love a cub on a grass strip with the door open on a hot day like today? That is 75% of all US flights. 3/4 of all the flights in the United States are general aviation flights. I would put up a pie chart for this, but you know what 3/4 are. It's more than 19,000 US landing facilities serving almost 1,000 communities. And here are two that might be familiar to you. That's Centennial on the left and the helipad at Children's Hospital on the right. And for you in northeastern Indiana, I apologize. This is mainly going to be with a lot of Colorado references. So it puzzles people that only half, more than half, of all of the airline flights serve just 21 hub airports in the whole United States out of 20,000 available landing facilities. 75% of all the major airline flights serve just 46 big city airports. That leaves all the rest of those 20,000 airports for us to take care of. So what's the public perception of general aviation? Well, as you've seen in the news recently, it is not real pleasant. We had 3 general aviation crashes in the Denver area in the past, couple, 3 months. And so their public perception is, there's these little airplanes raining down out of the sky, waiting to fall on hospitals and schools and orphanages. And these are the kind of pictures that we see on the news that reinforce that idea. Now, as aviation people, we are all the ambassadors for general aviation. Nobody else is going to do this for us. The journalists aren't going to do it for us. They're out for the sensational story. The military and the commercial airlines, well, there's a lot of commercial pilots who are also general aviation pilots, but they are probably not going to go on the bandwagon for general aviation in a big way. So what's the other public perception of general aviation? And this is just as prevalent as the sky raining Piper Cubs and Cessnas. Well, it's conspicuous consumption. If you are flying an airplane in general aviation, you must be rich. And those business jets are luxurious and they really do capture the public's imagination. And they're portrayed in media and so forth. You might remember back in 2008 when there was the big economic financial crisis, and there were hearings in Congress about approving $85 billion with a B bailout of the major car makers. And the people coming to testify on Capitol Hill from those car makers flew in business jets. What else? You expect them to walk? But it didn't go over well when they're coming with their hat in hand to borrow $85 billion from the government. And it really left a bad taste in a lot of people's mouths seeing them parading in business jets. And companies that have airplanes like to get a lot of use out of them. This is a graph from Forbes magazine that they ranked each of the S&P 500 companies according to how much they gave away to their personnel for personal flights. This wasn't for company business. And there at the far left of the graph, some of the biggest, richest CEOs spent over $1 million per year on the company's airplanes, not paying for them and not on business. And that's like $5,000 per hour every day. So down at the bottom right, I couldn't resist. How many of you have seen the James Bond movie Goldfinger and remember Herr Goldfinger and his thing? This was from back in 1963. And Goldfinger flew around in one of, the very first business jet, the Lockheed Jetstar. And we can all remember Pussy Galore introducing James Bond to the Jetstar. You're flying in Mr. Goldfinger's Lockheed Jetstar. And we all know what happened to Goldfinger if you've seen the movie. He shot out a window and got sucked out that window. So anyway, summary of public opinion. Small aircraft are dangerous, noisy, and they're expensive toys for the rich. They're not for people like you and me. And they might just be unnecessary. And we're hearing things like that. You probably got the letter from CPA back in March. We needed to get on with the House bill and talk about general aviation because they were, well, several of our GA airports are getting a lot of flack from the public lately, and some of them are in danger of being shut down. So where do they get the idea that they are unnecessary? Well, one thing that I ran across was this book. Now, it's an old book. It's from 1969, but Donald Bain wrote The Case Against Private Aviation. This is a hardcover, important book. People read it. This is the back cover of it. And I blew up part of it so I could circle some things. Donald Bain has held a private license for 12 years, but he doesn't fly anymore because, quote, it's too dangerous, unquote. Then in the next line, it says, oh, he got how the commercial side of aviation worked while he worked as a public relations writer for American Airlines. Oh, go figure. Then there's a quote from a congressperson down here. This book calls proper attention to a serious national problem. How long can we tolerate the practically unrestricted use of the skies over our large cities by private airplanes? The knife. So let's talk about those crashes for a few minutes. We'll get the nasty stuff out of the way up front, then we'll turn it around towards the end. So the crashes. You talk to people about general aviation, and quite often you hear, the only times I hear about small planes are when they're crashing. Well, you can ask them to Google the AOPA McSpadden report, and they just changed the name of it a couple of years ago. It was formerly the Knoll report, and it is eye-opening. It is a wonderful, wonderful document to build up your arsenal for when you're talking to people about the defense of general aviation. 2023, which is the latest report that we have because we're still in the middle of 2024. In 2023, in the whole United States, fixed wing, non-commercial airplane crashes, there were only 157 fatal accidents. That's in the whole United States. Only 253 fatalities in the whole United States. And that's in spite of more than 25 million hours flown by general aviation. The thing is, if crashes were not so rare, they wouldn't be news. In the Denver metro area, we kill between 1 and 3 people in traffic accidents just about every day. But unless it's really a spectacular or noteworthy crash, you just don't see it in the news. It's not news. The conspicuous consumption argument. Let's address this with dollars and cents. Okay, you hear and small airplanes are enormously expensive. So naturally, those of you who own general aviation airplanes must be wealthy. And I'm sure you are, right? Because a new light sport airplane, a Ramos or GX or whatever, 145 grand. That's not pocket change for most of us. A new Cirrus, $600,000 by the time you put avionics in it. A new Gulfstream, $50 million. Anybody online here with me know of anybody that's got 50 million that they can just use for a toy? But that's not the reality of it. The cost per hour of family fun, you can buy a used Mooney M20F for $65,000. And that's not a beat up one that you're going to have to restore. You can buy a flyable, good looking used Mooney for 65 grand. That's the price of a used, 5-year-old Ford Mustang. You can buy a used Grumman Traveler for between $30,000 and $60,000. Well, heck, that's the price of a 8-year-old Dodge Ram pickup. You can buy a used Piper Pacer or Tri-Pacer for between $15,000 and $35,000. Well, that'll buy you a 2013 Toyota Avalon, a car that's 11 years old already. And if your tail wheel checked out, you can buy yourself a used Taylorcraft F-19. Now, this isn't the 1940s Taylorcraft. These are the ones that were being made in the 1970s. $13,000 to $16,000. Shoot, that's the price of a basically 10-year-old Chevrolet Cruze. So you don't have to be a multimillionaire to own and fly a general aviation airplane. Now, because of my audience tonight, you know, and I know the insurance, the hangars, the fees, the maintenance annuals and so forth, that runs the cost up quite a bit. But still, you can tell somebody, you know, a used airplane doesn't cost much more than a used car and not be lying. Or you can do like I do, like many of us do, just join a flying club already and rent an airplane. And the most ubiquitous airplane is the Cessna 172. I'm going to get my curator's hat on for just a minute and explain that. Did you know that it wasn't that many years ago that half of all the airplanes in the world were Cessnas? And 1 out of every 10 of all the airplanes flying in the world was a Cessna 172. They've made more than 40,000 of these. I think the total's up to about 42,000 now. So you can rent one for maybe $110 to $130 an hour, fuel included. So how does that compare to other ways that you might spend your available cash? I put the Cessna up there at the top. If you divide it by 4 people, if you've got 2 kids that you can put in the back seat, you can't put 2 grown-ups back there at our density altitudes, but a couple of kids, and divide it out, that 110 to 130 an hour is $27.50 per person per hour. Okay, well, compare that to bowling. If you go down to Bolero on Leedsdale Drive, you'll spend $221 for 2 hours of bowling for 2 adults and 2 kids if you rent shoes. That's $55.25 an hour to go bowling per person per hour. If you're a skier, you know how lift tickets have gone through the roof. If you want to take those 2 kids skiing and you buy just a lift ticket at Vail, Beaver Creek, or Steamboat, that's between $890 and $1,000 just for one day. And maybe you'll spend, you know, 3 or 4 hours tops going down the slopes. You know, the rest of the time you're waiting in lift lines, you're in the lodge warming up, you're drinking hot chocolate or whatever. So that's $45 to $54 per hour compared to $27.50 to $32.50 for flying that Cessna 172. If you just go down to Elitch's for 4 people, 2 adults and 2 kids, the tickets are the same whether you're an adult or a kid, pay for parking, get a meal, and get the ride pass so you're not spending all your time waiting in lines, that's $550 for one day. Now let's assume that you're going to be doing things for 6.5 hours there. Park opens at 10:30, closes at 7 or 8 at night, but you're going to spend some time going to the bathroom, eating, stuff like that. That breaks down to $20 an hour per person per hour. That's not that much less than flying that Cessna 172. There's other things that I could have looked up: cost of scuba diving, a round of golf, dinner at a nice restaurant. I know that because my family went out not that long ago. It was $300 for 3 of us, and it was about an hour and a half. So that's like $66 an hour for the fun and the food. So what's the reality? The reality about general aviation. We've dealt with the perceptions, but what's the reality? How does general aviation affect the lives of the general public? Now, I'm talking to you as advocates and ambassadors on behalf of general aviation. This is some of the ammunition, some of the arrows in your quiver that you can use when you have those tough discussions with people who would like to see Centennial shut down, Boulder shut down, etc. Well, they help keep your lights on. The utility companies use helicopters with very brave people, and they repair high tension lines in flight. The helicopter hovers, the guy gets out on a little platform and fixes insulators, wires that are getting ready to break. This is preventive maintenance. This is keeping your lights on. They put food on your table. Well, they help. Uh, yes, they spray unhealthy pesticides, but they also spread fertilizers. And yes, you're going to get some feedback, some pushback. Well, those fertilizers wash down into the watersheds and out into the Gulf of Mexico, and they poison fish and create algae blooms and toxic, you know, uh, water with no oxygen in it and so forth. Well, that is all true, but it's also what's putting food on your table at a reasonable price. They also use an awful lot of biologically safe fertilizers and pesticides. They also spray ladybugs or dump ladybugs out of a hopper, and that is a natural pesticide. The ladybugs eat the other pests. So it doesn't have to be all about pollution. They fly out to those oil rigs out in the Gulf of Mexico and off the coast of, well, both coasts, and help with getting the crews to and from, flying parts that are needed out there to keep the oil flowing to the pipelines that so it can get refined into diesel for your truck and fuel for your home and for your employer. We forget when we're talking about the fuel that we use that it's not just our cars and what we burn in our furnaces and boilers and water heaters. It's where we work. They use a lot of fuel too. It makes your commute go a lot smoother, especially in big cities. News helicopters. Some of you CPA people will remember we had Mike Silva, former news helicopter pilot, as one of our guests of honor at our annual meeting not too long ago. Lost and found. Where would we be without the Civil Air Patrol going out and finding lost backcountry skiers, lost hikers, lost Cub Scout troops, whatever? Could save your house. You know, there's a lot of wildfires. There's a lot of people's houses that are in the path of wildfires. And the slurry bombers, the water tankers, the air tankers, those are all general aviation aircraft, even if they're huge 4-engine transports. Those are general aviation aircraft, and they could save your home or the home of somebody that you know. They could save your life. You've seen the orange Flight for Life helicopters and the green and blue Air Life helicopters and some of the other helicopters around the state. And yes, they do go out and pick people up that have been in bad accidents, skiing, backcountry skiing, car accidents, boating accidents, and so forth, and fly them to trauma centers where their lives get saved. I would ask for a show of hands, except I wouldn't be able to see them. But when I do this live, I ask how many people in the audience have either had their lives saved by a medevac flight or know somebody who has. And I'll tell you right flat out, it's usually about 2/3 to 3/4 of the people that I'm talking to. And it's not just the trauma cases. The Flight for Life fixed wing airplanes fly people from city to city, critical care. Mayo Aviation flies people from city to city with essentially flying ICUs. They fly human organs from donors to recipients. And some of our CPA people I know are involved with Angel Flight, where you fly patients for treatment to other cities in your own private personal airplane for free. Those are the kinds of things that the general public needs to hear. Ask them if they like to fish. Those are 4 Cessna 185s operated by the Colorado Division of Wildlife. Yes, most of the rivers and streams in Colorado are stocked. Those fish didn't grow there. They were hatched in hatcheries. They were put into ice water and they were taken there either in trucks and dumped, or for most of the mountain lakes, that lower left picture shows one of those Cessna 185s, and that little spray coming out the belly of it behind it, those are fingerlings being dropped in that lake. And they get down, they don't want to traumatize the baby fish, so they have to be pretty darn close to the surface of the lake when they let them go. Very narrow window of too high versus too low. And the fish go in there, they grow up, and then you catch them and bring home and eat them. We would not have those lakes stocked if it weren't for general aviation. If you appreciate wildlife conservation and the reintroduction of endangered species and so forth, then you'll love aviation. In an earlier version of this talk, I had a great old picture from the 1960s of a moose on a sling under a helicopter being reintroduced to the area up around Walden. There were no moose up there, and now moose are spreading all over the state. Whenever you hear about wolves being tracked by radio collars or other tagged or collared animals being tracked, that's tracked with general aviation aircraft. By the way, those two women are some of the national parks pilots. Wildlife counts, figuring out how the herds are doing, migration patterns, drought, whether animals are starving, all of that is handled with general aviation airplanes that gather the data. The mail, neither snow nor rain, nor heat, nor gloom of night shall stay them from their appointed rounds. Well, a lot of your mail might come in on a 747 to Denver International Airport, but I guarantee you it goes to Grand Junction, Steamboat, Montrose, Lamar on a smaller airplane. Some of it does go in the back of a semi, but if it's important mail, chances are it's going to go there in a general aviation airplane. And that overnight stuff, every time you click buy on Amazon or Etsy or wherever you shop online, and they promise 2-day delivery, 3-day delivery, those things aren't usually sitting in a warehouse here in Denver where they just put it on a truck and bring it to your house. Typically, those will fly between major hubs on a big air cargo airplane. But then from there, like I say, to most of the medium and smaller communities, they're going in Cessna Caravans, Falcons, King Airs, things like that. The law enforcement people use general aviation a lot. And those are civilian airplanes. Those are general aviation airplanes. The top one is the Colorado State Patrol, the Bear in the Air. Not only do they use it to catch speeders, they also use it to report wildfires, to transfer convicts between prisons, lots of other interesting things that the State Patrol does. Denver Police, you have heard their helicopter flying over your house day and night. They have a great team of pilots, and they do a superb job. Not just local law enforcement, but national law enforcement, the Border Patrol, the FBI, the Drug Enforcement Agency, they all use general aviation airplanes. And then there's just getting you there. If you're not flying in a scheduled airliner, a Part 121 airliner, if you're flying an unscheduled airline, or if you're flying Part 135 and chartering, that's general aviation too. And there is no airline service to most cities in the United States. Sightseeing, ecotourism, these airplanes don't leave footprints. They don't leave trash around. People get to see things from a different perspective. And it is a very interesting way to see things that you wouldn't see from the ground. Sports coverage. Remember the blimps? I think a lot of them are being replaced with drones nowadays, but there are still plenty of blimps in service covering stadium sports. One of the things that appeals to me a lot is bringing history to life. If it weren't for general aviation, you would see no World War I airplanes except in museums. You would see nothing flying, no flyable warbirds. Here's some of the things. That one on the lower right is Sonoran Beauty, a Navy SNB, a Twin Beach that's hangared right up at Rocky Mountain Metro for the Commemorative Air Force. Over and over and over, all of those classic warbirds and vintage airplanes that are kept flying, that's all general aviation. Museums can't afford to do it, and commercial entities generally won't do it. Aerial surveying and map making. People seem to have the idea that all of their USGS maps that you use when hiking, all of the city maps that come up on your Google Maps when you use your phone, those are all taken from space. Well, a lot of them are, but a lot of them are not. They're shot from general aviation airplanes flying back and forth in a grid pattern, mowing the lawn. So when you see a map like this on Google Maps, or when you hit the overlay and see actual houses, those pictures were taken probably by a general aviation airplane. That's my house right there. Lots of detail. Looks like I need to trim the weeds again. And then those real estate websites, Zillow, Redfin, all the others, they have the pictures that were taken by general aviation also. Often they'll have oblique views where you can see the airplane was to one side or the other instead of directly above. So you can see what the front of the house looks like from the air, or the north side or the west side or the east side. One of the things that general aviation airplanes do that is very important but very invisible is checking nav aids, VORs, instrument landing systems. That hasn't been replaced by GPS. All of those things are there as a backup and as primary navigation in a lot of parts of the world, and they all have to be checked for accuracy periodically, and that's all done by the FAA and their contractors flying general aviation airplanes. Atmospheric research. This is a big one. A lot of you are familiar with the National Center for Atmospheric Research up in Boulder, and you probably know that there is an NCAR hangar at Rocky Mountain Regional. Here are some of the airplanes that have inhabited that hangar and Boulder Airport, which is where they fly some of their other atmospheric research from. The Lockheed Electra with the magnetic anomaly detector boom was used up until the 2000s. That glider on the right, 29er Juliet, was used by NCAR for thunderstorm research. Amazing that you can fly a glider into a thunderstorm. Why a glider? Because it doesn't have any electronics to be fried, and it doesn't have an engine to knock out, and it can gather a lot of untainted data. And it doesn't set up any magnetic fields inside the storm that might interfere with the data. How many of you knew that the Colorado State University used McDonnell F-101 Voodoo jet fighter for thunderstorm research back in the 1970s and 80s? You can see stenciled right under Colorado State University on the side of the fuselage there, it says severe storm research. And there's 29er Juliet again in the upper right. They would fly up to 30, 40,000 feet in these thunderstorms, lots of updrafts inside thunderstorms, gathering data. They had to wear these huge insulated suits, no heater in a glider. Now NCAR is flying a Grumman Gulfstream and a Lockheed C-130 Hercules, and you'll occasionally see these flying over your house right here in the Denver metro area. So what's the upshot of all this atmospheric research? What does it do for your audience, that person you're trying to convince that general aviation is worth saving after all? Well, it gets us a lot more accurate weather forecasts. This graph shows from 1991 until 2017 how the reliability and the accuracy of forecasts improved over time. It wasn't very accurate, maybe from 70 to 85%, the top blue graph there, margin of error. And now in 2017, there's practically no margin of error. So better forecasts so that we know when severe weather's moving in, when there's going to be 12 inches, 13 inches of snow, when there's going to be hail, when there's going to be tornado activity, and better science. A lot of this research work is just raw, pure research, gathering information on how the atmosphere works, how the dynamics inside of clouds work, how downbursts work. That's the illustration on the left. Downbursts and microbursts, by the way, those can slap a jet fighter out of the sky or an airliner out of the sky, and you don't want to be taking off or landing anywhere near a thunderstorm in a general aviation airplane. Likewise, the forecasts for tornadoes and tornado activity, that's gotten a huge amount of accuracy and reliability just in the last 20 years. Advance notice of severe weather. This is another one of those graphs that shows from 1970 to 2015 how prediction of the path and the severity of hurricanes has improved because of atmospheric research. And they do this by gathering hard data. This isn't modeling. This is flying airplanes into thunderstorms, into severe weather, and into mountain waves, things like that, and gathering real-time, real data. Flight training. And I put a question mark there. Flight training? How does that affect your audience? Why is that important to me? Well, every pilot of one of these started out in one of these, or maybe one of these, or one of these, or maybe they flew a general aviation sized airplane when they were in the military, or the ubiquitous Cessna 150, 152. Another Curator comment here. This is the airplane that has trained more pilots in the world than any other airplane, bar none, Cessna 150 and 152. So perhaps you've heard that there's an acute shortage of pilots these days. Well, there is. You can read it in the papers, you can read it online, you can hear it through the media, you can get it through your feed, whatever. In 2008, Boeing predicted that there was a coming need for pilots and mechanics and flight attendants and air traffic controllers, but this is about general aviation. In 2016, I was working for Jefferson at that time as a writer and editor. Emirates, biggest, most rich country in the world, Emirates Airlines built a huge, beautiful new flight training academy, basically an international airport just for training their airline pilots from scratch. And they couldn't get anybody to sign up. All the people in Dubai are so filthy rich that even flying airplanes for a living, not so hot stuff. So they were having this huge marketing campaign on trying to entice people to learn to fly and become airline pilots. It's amazing. In 2020, COVID hit, the airlines were shut down, and the airlines retired thousands of pilots. In 2024, we are now short 18,000 pilots this year alone. And that gap is going between the pilots trained and the pilots available, or pilots needed and pilots available, is going to increase over the next few years until supply catches up with demand. So your audience who's against general aviation really needs to be out there advocating for general aviation so that they can get pilots into the pilot pipeline so that there will be qualified people in the right and left seats of the airliners that you buy tickets on. General aviation does a lot of disaster relief, domestically and internationally. And a mile of road gets you 1 mile, but a mile of runway gets you anywhere. That's a quote from the 1930s. It's true. If you pay $1 million to pave a mile of highway, you got to do another mile and another mile and another mile if you're going to get that highway to take you anywhere. But if you build an airport, airplanes can come and go from anywhere. When there was both a hurricane and an earthquake right after each other in Haiti, the airport was out of business. The runways were cracked. There were, they weren't able to use the length of the runways, but general aviation airplanes could get in there. And they had a small aircraft boat lift or airlift from Florida down to Haiti, just single and twin engine airplanes flying stuff in. And it made a huge difference. General aviation just flat does a lot of good in the world. They fly materials and construction workers into communities in third world countries to build clinics and hospitals and schools, libraries. They bring in food, they bring in doctors. It's just general aviation does an awful lot of good. So what about the menace? What about the menace posed by general aviation? And by that, I mean the threat of terrorism. Now, I've been giving this talk for many years. I add to it and update it frequently, but back in the early 2000s, when I started giving this talk, it was, well, 911 had just happened. Bad people could use small airplanes to commit acts of terror. Oh my gosh, what if people in these tiny little airplanes started flying them into buildings? We had just seen airliners crash into the Pentagon and the Twin Towers, and the passengers brought down a fourth airplane that would have gone into the Capitol or the White House. So yeah, airplanes can be used as terrorist weapons, and that's a bad thing. But people in general aviation work hard to minimize that threat. When I was growing up, general aviation airports basically did not have fences around them. You could drive up, get out of the parking lot and walk onto the flight line, chat with pilots, offer to wash their airplane and trade for flight time. And a lot of teenagers did this. And I worked at Centennial when it was still Arapahoe County Airport, and there was no security and no need for it. But now there are barbed wire fences around most general aviation airports, or at least chain link fences. Everything's under video surveillance. You have to punch in a code to get through a gate to get onto the flight line. But the bottom line is general aviation airplanes would make lousy weapons. Let's do some thought and comparison with the 9/11 attacks. The terrorists used a Boeing 757 and 767, and this is the difference in weight on a bar graph between a 767, a 757, and a Cessna 172. And I had to exaggerate the line for the Cessna 172 so you could even see it. It is infinitesimal compared to the weight of a jetliner. Likewise, the fuel that these airplanes carried compared to what a Cessna 172 would carry, a typical general aviation airplane, in the tens of thousands of gallons, where your 172 can carry 50 gallons. So a beach Bonanza weighs about the same as a Toyota Corolla, or at least it did in 2001. They both had empty weights of around 2,500 pounds. 78% of general aviation airplanes weigh less than a compact car, and they carry a lot less load. So small airplanes would be a heck of a lot less of a threat than car bombs or truck bombs, because airplanes are a lot harder to get than a rental car or a rental truck. Remember the Oklahoma City bombing? So I leave it to you to decide, is aviation a menace or is it a necessity? And please go out in the community, talk up general aviation every chance that you get. If you hear somebody complaining about the noise, complaining about these pesky little airplanes flying over their house, whatever, take them aside and in a very friendly way, ask them some questions. How much, gauge how much they know about general aviation, see where they're at, and then start talking to them about it person to person. That is the best way to change minds and help save general aviation. So I will now open it up to questions, and I appreciate you all being here. Thank you very much for jumping on the Zoom meeting. And who wants to unmute first?
Well, I've got one question that came in early on. Scrolling back here. We had a question regarding, are you able to address the chronic problem of pilots flying without valid medical certificates and or hiding their special issuance expiration behind basic med, or basically any disqualifying medical conditions necessitating a special issuance?
That's a good question. And no, I don't have any hard data on how many pilots might be flying with expired medicals or deciding not to get a medical and going basic med. And to be perfectly honest, if somebody asked me that question, I'd say, I'm just not sure that that's a problem. There's just, the statistics aren't showing that that's any kind of a problem that needs to be worried about. We don't hear about pilots having medical issues and killing people or having accidents. I know that's not much of an answer, but that's the best I can do. I'd rather do that than make something up.
Yep, that's totally fine. If anybody has any questions, feel free to type it in, or if you want to unmute and ask Chuck directly, you're more than welcome to. Or Chuck just answered all the questions, which means it was just a really good presentation.
Thank you so much. Amazing presentation. And those of us up here in Boulder County, both Longmont and Boulder Airport, are in the middle of an existential threat. Have you been able to reach out to either city council and offered a brief on general aviation, or could we recruit you to do so?
The answer to the first is no. The answer to the second is absolutely. I would love to. I gave this same basic presentation to the EAA chapter at Boulder maybe about a year ago, and they said essentially the same thing. We need to get you in front of the people who need to hear this. And I would be happy to do that. When I was working for the museum, I was literally working more than 60 hours a week, and I didn't have time for stuff like that. Now I'm retired, and I still don't have time, but I will make time for that. And somebody put in the chat, address lead and noise.
That was me.
Thank you. I appreciate that. That is something that has just popped up in the last few months with discussions about, our general aviation piston engine airplanes burn gasoline that still has lead in it. And it's low lead, but it still does put lead into the air. Somebody has gotten hold of some statistics, and I am a skeptic about how the science was done, but they say that kids who grow up around general aviation airports end up with more lead in their bodies than kids who don't. I haven't seen the studies, so I don't know if they were rigorous. I don't know if they had controls. I don't know where the information comes from. But seriously, airports are almost always put, especially general aviation airports, away from residential areas and in industrial areas that have a lot of factories and put out a lot of pollution. So is the lead coming from an airplane flying over at 1,000 feet or 3,000 feet? Or is it coming from some other emitter? How much does how much lead goes into your tank when you fill up your airplane? I have no idea. Is it grams? Is it ounces? And yeah, of course it comes out the tailpipe, but how does it get dispersed? And yes, I can imagine that airplanes that do a lot of touch and goes, takeoffs and landings are putting out more, but still, I'm going to have to do more research personally before I'm convinced that that is elevating lead levels significantly in people around airports. But yeah, that's something I do need to do some homework and put it into the presentation. I appreciate
I'll send you a link to the National Academy of Science and Engineering and Medicine that they did. But the evidence is far from convincing.
I agree. And I did see that thing on the NPAS website. I did not read it verbatim or read it page by page, but I did look at the abstract. And yeah, you're right. It seems kind of vague. And so
When I talk about this, which I've been doing a lot lately, I also point out that, worrying about lead and noise is a retrospective view of airports. Looking forward, the FAA and EPA have dedicated a lot of work to eliminating lead, which is a good thing, as long as it's consistent with our airplanes. And electric aircraft, like the Cessna Pipistrel Electra Aero, is almost silent and doesn't have any emissions. So the forward look of general aviation is incredibly promising, including urban air mobility with these eVTOLs and such, which will use our general aviation airports.
thank you. I could not have said it better myself. I appreciate that. And yeah, if I read the EPA statement correctly, they intend to have lead out of our fuel by 2030. And that's like 6 years away, 5 years away. People be patient.
Yeah, the answer is no. And the other answer is both for Boulder and Longmont anyway. It's not about lead. It's not about noise. It's about housing development on those very valuable properties. And they don't think about the increased traffic or the disturbing of soil or any of the other issues. But mainly, they view the airports as, one airport in their backyard, not part of a national airspace that serves us so well in all the ways you so aptly described. Again, thank you for your talk.
Yeah, and so many people in Boulder, especially. Boulder's kind of my home. I prefer to fly out of Boulder. And if anybody in the Boulder area or Longmont area really needed convincing that it's necessary to have a general aviation airport in their community, that flood that we had in 2013 should have put it to rest, because the Army was flying their Chinooks in and out, fishing people off rooftops during the floods. There were Blackhawks going in and out. There was general aviation airplanes flying in pallet loads of water and blankets and tarps and so forth. So if they hadn't had that mile of runway, things would have been a heck of a lot worse. So I'll get off my soapbox. Any other questions?
Can you hear me? This is Bill.
I can.
I have a concern. You've mentioned the pesky little airplanes, and of course, we all face that in the aviation. And there was a posting on Nextdoor a while back about a guy couldn't enjoy his coffee and set because of the pesky little people with their useless little airplanes. You have referred everything to the impact in general aviation, from the small to the large. And of course, Centennial Airport, as you know, being out there, is one of the major training centers, if you will, in the Denver metro area, with the flight schools they have, and does create quite a stir with noise, with the laps around doing their normal touch and goes. But there has been nothing presented in regarding to the economic impact. I have a plane that burns approximately 15 gallons an hour, at $6-7 a gallon. The labor rate at the FBO, the number of people that work at Centennial or close by of Centennial, with all the businesses, the Colorado State has a couple of Pilateses out there that do the searching for fire, burns fuel, has salaries for those people, have offices to rent, the hangars that are being built are, $3 and $4 million, hundreds of millions of dollars of impact. Have you ever added to your presentation the economic impact of an airport such as Centennial, or in Boulder, Longmont, Loveland, that type, to kind of analyze for these people, say, yeah, we do all these things, but this is the economic impact of adding taxes to the tax base. hundreds of millions of dollars, if not $1 billion a year out at Centennial, adds quite a bit of taxes that you and I don't have to pay from the additional property or other taxes, from that standpoint. Have you thought of getting any of that data?
That is an admirable suggestion, and I have thought of it, but I haven't gotten around to it. There are signs on Dry Creek Road as you're driving towards Centennial that say you're entering the economic impact zone for Centennial Airport. And yes, you're absolutely right. I should mention all the jobs that it creates and all the revenue that it brings in. And, Denver has the largest and fastest growing aerospace corporate community in the whole country. And Colorado is the second largest aerospace economy in the country. And we need to let our people know that that's important. Even if you don't work for an aerospace company, you know people who do. And a lot of those companies are not Lockheed Martin and not Raytheon and so forth. They are Boom Technology and Sierra Nevada and places that are built up around Centennial and around Rocky Mountain. And yeah, there's quite a few in Boulder. They fly airplanes in and out of Boulder for CU and their research departments and National Institute of Standards and Technology. And those are all very good points. And if people knew how much that airport is doing for their tax base, their revenue generation and so forth, I think that might get some headway, because like John was saying, follow the money. And if that airport's going to make you more money than that housing development, that might be something that people would pay attention to.
Thank
John
you.
posted.
At this point, I see John posted this 2.1 billion at Centennial. That is a major impact.
Yeah, he also provided the link. CDOT has a review of all the revenue generated by the airports that they put out, and I don't know what the frequency is, but I think it's every couple of years or something like that. It's a real good resource for the value that the airports bring to the communities.
I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
Okay.
Oops, wrong button.
There you go.
And that way
Cool. Any
I
other
can read
questions?
the chat.
If there aren't any other questions, we want to thank Chuck for a really great presentation. We've had a lot of interest in this. Once we get done with this session, I'll be downloading the video and I'll process it through and post it on our YouTube channel. So please feel free to go out there and subscribe to that. And Chuck, if I could have you hang around for just a couple minutes, we'll go ahead and close the session out. Thank you for your evening, Chuck. I appreciate it.